H.R. 5528, the Safe and Smart Federal Purchasing Act of 2023, a bill to require the Director of the Office of Management and Budget to evaluate the lowest price, technically acceptable provisions in the Federal Acquisition Regulation.
Without objection, the bill shall be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. Without objection, so ordered. The chair recognizes himself to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute. The clerk, please designate the amendment.
An amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 5528 as offered by Mr. Comer of Kentucky.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and the substitute will be considered as original text for the purposes of further amendment. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for a statement on the bill and the amendment. I support H.R. 5528, the Safe and Smart Federal Purchasing Act, the lowest price technically acceptable, LPTA, is a source selection method outlined in the Federal Acquisition Regulation. This process uses price as a determining factor for a contract rather than any other technical or operational factors. Following legislative work done by this committee during the 115th Congress, constraints were placed on agency use of LPTA in the fiscal year 2019 NDAA. These constraints recognize that LPTA criteria are not always appropriate for agencies seeking complex or technically innovative series. For instance, this can result in agencies sacrificing long-term value for short-term savings. We also do not want LPTA to be used in a manner that jeopardizes national security. This bill requires the Director of Office of Management and Budget to evaluate this source selection process to determine whether agencies are using LPTA in a manner that creates any national security risk. This legislation is a useful step toward understanding the current methods federal agencies are using for their source selection decisions. It will uncover whether agencies are relying on LPTA when it is not appropriate. I want to thank Mr. Donalds of Florida for his leadership on this bill. I urge my colleagues to support this measured and targeted legislation that can inform future committee work on federal procurement, a policy area we all know is ripe for reform and potential taxpayer savings. I now recognize the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Safe and Smart Federal Purchasing Act would require the Director of OMB to evaluate the procurement activities of each agency to determine whether the use of lowest price technically acceptable, or LPTA, acquisition procedures have created any national security risks. Under LPTA procedures, price is the determining factor in awarding a contract to a technically acceptable offer with no consideration given to any other factors. This contrasts with the more frequently used best value process, under which cost is just one factor, and non-cost factors like quality and performance, technical or managerial expertise, and past performance are included in the evaluation. Recent Congresses have passed legislation requiring DoD and civilian agencies to limit the circumstances in which LPTA is used. While I don't intend to oppose the legislation today, Mr. Chairman, I do ask you to work with the minority as the bill moves forward in the legislative process. I note that we have not received input on this bill yet from the administration, and I'm not sure that the Director of OMB is the appropriate person to be conducting these evaluations, or that the evaluation could be accomplished in 6 months as the bill requires. But with those caveats, I'm happy to go along with it, and I thank you and yield back.
The committee will come to order. A quorum being present, we will now resume debate on the ANS to HR 5528. The question is now on the final passage of 5528 as amended. All those in favor? This one first. Okay, the question is now on the amendment in the nature of a substitute. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The question is now on final passage of 5528 as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes.
Chair, I call for a recorded vote.
A recorded vote is ordered pursuant to House rules. All recorded votes will be rolled in to the end, which we're starting now. Now the question is on favorably reporting HR 5528, the Safe and Smart Federal Purchasing Act. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Jordan, Mr. Turner, Mr. Gosar. Mr. Gosar votes yes. Ms. Fox. Ms. Fox votes yes. Mr. Grothman. Mr. Grothman votes yes. Mr. Palmer. Mr. Palmer votes aye. Mr. Higgins. Mr. Higgins votes yes. Mr. Sessions? Mr. Sessions votes aye. Mr. Biggs? Mr. Biggs votes aye. Ms. Mace? Ms. Mace votes aye. Mr. LaTurner? Mr. LaTurner votes aye. Mr. Fallon? Mr. Fallon votes aye. Mr. Donalds? Mr. Donalds votes yes. Mr. Armstrong? Mr. Armstrong votes yes. Mr. Perry? Mr. Perry votes aye. Mr. Timmons? Mr. Timmons votes aye. Mr. Burchett? Mr. Burchett votes aye. Ms. Green? Ms. Green votes yes. Ms. McLean? Ms. McLean votes yes. Ms. Boebert? Ms. Boebert votes aye. Mr. Fry? Mr. Fry votes aye. Ms. Luna? Mr. Edwards? Mr. Edwards votes aye. Mr. Langworthy? Mr. Langworthy votes aye. Mr. Burleson? Mr. Burleson votes aye. Mr. Raskin?
Aye.
Mr. Raskin votes aye. Ms. Norton?
Yes.
Ms. Norton votes yes. Mr. Lynch?
Yes.
Mr. Lynch votes yes. Mr. Connolly?
Aye.
Mr. Connolly votes aye. Mr. Krishnamurthy? Mr. Krishnamurthy votes aye. Mr. Khanna? Mr. Khanna votes aye. Mr. Mfume?
Aye.
Mr. Mfume votes aye. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez? Ms. Ocasio-Cortez votes aye. Ms. Porter? Ms. Porter votes aye. Ms. Bush? Ms. Bush votes aye. Mr. Gomez? Mr. Gomez votes aye. Ms. Brown? Ms. Brown votes aye. Ms. Stansbury? Ms. Stansbury votes aye. Mr. Garcia? Mr. Garcia votes aye. Mr. Frost? Mr. Frost votes aye. Ms. Lee? Ms. Lee votes yes. Mr. Kassar? Mr. Kassar votes yes. Ms. Crockett?
Yes.
Ms. Crockett votes yes. Mr. Goldman? Mr. Goldman votes aye. Mr. Moskowitz? Mr. Moskowitz votes aye. Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman votes yes.
Any members failed to record their vote yet? Seeing none, will the clerk please tally?
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, the ayes are 43, the nays are 0.
The ayes have it, and the bill is ordered favorably reported. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.